Hello, this is Mark Tooley, editor of Providence, a journal of Christianity and American foreign policy, with another episode of Marksism with fellow editors and fellow Marks, Mark Levecki and Mark Melton, conversing on three of our articles this week. Firstly, by Alan Dowd on the successes of the Trump administration in terms of national security and foreign policy. And essentially, he cites increased defense spending, a more assertive US presence around the world, in some cases, pivoting against the rising threat from China, and among some other topics. So, Mark Levecki, what was your reaction, and to what extent? And I should, of course, mention the success of Arab regimes recognizing Israel as they confront the threat from Iran, and of course and perhaps that's a direct consequence of the Trump administration's pulling the U.S. out of the nuclear agreement with Iran negotiated under the Obama administration. So arguably the U.S. is in a stronger position in the Mideast against Iran. Now, some would say these successes would have occurred generally under almost any Republican administration. Others would say no, there was something unique about the Trump policies that contributed, from their view, to success in these arenas. What do you think, Mark Levecki?
Yeah, I suppose forced to choose, I would suggest that, like it or not, Trump was uniquely positioned to make a change. The man, clearly has a habit of spitting in the wind. He's willing to try things that are different, that other Republican presidents haven't tried. And so I'm doubtful whether or not the full resume of successes that Dowd identifies could have been accomplished by anybody else, or qualify that they could have been accomplished by absolutely anybody. But you needed somebody who was willing to, break form and to do things differently.
Our contributing editor, Walter Russell Mead, has argued elsewhere that the chaos, if you want to put it that way, and uncertainty of the Trump administration in some ways enhanced America's situation, in that America could no longer be taken for granted, and friends and adversaries had to be more mindful of what America wanted. So there's that argument as well. What do you think, Mark Melton?
Obviously, there's a lot of different hypotheticals here, but I think Dowd brings up a lot of good points, and he doesn't mention Israel actually in this list, but I think definitely that the peace with all these different countries in Israel is a very historic moment, and we're seeing a shift in the Middle East with Iran and seeming Turkey are going to probably team up closer with Palestine, and then you have a lot of the Arab countries moving to form peace with Israel. And that is a very interesting dynamic, and the Trump administration deserves credit on all of that. And then also, the ending of sequestration during the previous administration and the Congress was putting a gun to the foot and then firing it, and that ending that was very important. And there's a lot of good things done. So I think it was a good article to kind of recap some of those.
It'll be interesting to see, from my perspective, where Biden pivots on this. Does he go back to the Obama administration's tact, as Melton has pointed out, that didn't work, or is he going to build on some of President Trump's strengths? So I recall the exchange Obama had with Romney during one of their debates, where Romney had pointed out that we have the smallest Navy since 1916. We don't have enough ships. And Obama very flippantly and asininely responded, well, we don't have as many bayonets and horses either, right? And he was wrong actually about the bayonets, and he was wrong about the Navy. And it's nice to see it, I was going to say restored, but restoring. And I just hope that Biden stays on that track rather than goes back to the failed tactics of his former boss.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting to see too, because it's, sometimes you might want to read the tea leaves of these appointments, but sometimes I wonder if these appointments, are they more political? And right. Because eventually it's going to be Biden making the choices. Same thing with Trump. Like, you could try to read the tea leaves of these appointments of, with John Bolton, what's he going to do? And, and then he doesn't really seem to follow what John Bolton wants. Same thing with Mattis and others. And so yeah, we're not going to know what's going to happen until it does in that situation. But I think all presidents have to respond to the realities on the ground. I think it seems that Biden is going to stay the course on certain things like the Abraham Accords and other things. So keeping the embassy in Jerusalem and other policies in that front. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see.
Anyone else remember the name Rex Tillerson?
Yeah, we remember. I remember I went to an event that he spoke at because we all kind of knew that he was on his way out. And so I wanted to see him while he was still Secretary of State. So, and I think like, a couple of weeks afterwards, he was gone.
Yes, he had his moment in the sun. Well, Mark Levesque, you of course returned from 2 years at Oxford. Our contributing editor, Paul Marshall, has written this piece on threats to freedom of speech at Cambridge that seemingly were resolved happily and then have implications for religious believers. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm proud of Cambridge. I think an Oxford man can say that and not be run out on a rail. It's he's writing on, and they had to deliberate in Cambridge on the difference between respect and toleration. And this is something that I have faced at first, very inadvertently, but since more head on, that there is a distinction with a purpose between those two terms. I think the most that people who disagree with one another can be expected to do is to tolerate one another, one another's ideas. The point being that, you tolerate rainy days, but you respect human beings. And obviously, we can respect those things that we hold most importantly in common, human dignity, being made in the Imago Dei in Hebraic terms. But you can't be expected to respect issues of vital difference. I'm on record as saying that I don't actually. C.S. Lewis, with all due respect to him, I don't respect even honest pacifists for being pacifists. I simply don't. I think it's a problematic ideology that leads to a lot of ill in the world. So I can't be expected to respect things of great difference, just like some of those who in Cambridge would disagree with me on almost everything can't be expected to respect what I have to say on those things. They do have to tolerate me. They shouldn't kill me. That's progress. And so when Paul Marshall, he notes that the problem with all of this is that toleration suggests that I think you might actually be wrong about something. It's judgy. And he says, that's okay. That's what we have to do. So the British would say, indeed. And I'd give it the American translation of show enough, right? That's what we have to do. We have to tolerate one another.
Mark Belton, do you respect honest pacifists?
This entire debate kind of gets into, I remember sitting in graduate school and listening to professors have very, very long, hour-long debates over definitions. And these they can be very important. And it's not surprising to see this debate happening at a, prestigious university, kind of parsing out the difference in these words. And one thing is in this piece that Marshall brings up that, and I didn't realize, I didn't know this history, that during the debate over the Virginia Declaration of Rights, there's a debate over toleration, and what they ended up with was the free exercise of religion. And so it's just interesting how, we pull up a dictionary and there's all these different definitions, but actually, knowing what you mean by these words can be incredibly important, because I see it a lot of times where people will bring up a word like respect, and one person means one thing and another person means something else, and you have to, and a lot of times people just end up talking past each other, and it's basically a useless debate until you get down to what do you mean by these words. And so it's interesting just kind of seeing this article and explaining what they mean.
Mark Levesque, you're an aficionado of World War II and related moral quandaries. Tell us about your latest coverage this week.
Yeah, I had the great privilege of speaking with preeminent military historian, World War II historian, Richard Frank. He's written a slew of books. One book in particular that I've been using a lot in my work on Hiroshima is called Downfall. but he most recently wrote a book happily titled Tower of Skulls. And it is the first of a trilogy that's dedicated to, as he says, counting all the bodies, counting all of the dead in World War II, not simply counting either the Allied dead or the Japanese dead, but accounting for civilian deaths throughout the Asian theater. And in doing so, restoring, the recognition of shared human dignity, but also sort of a no holds barred accounting of the violence and the sort of the vile character of the imperial Japanese regime. So we discussed it. We discussed its ramifications on how American civilian and military leaders pursued the end of the war in the Pacific, as well as talking about some of the personalities. Marshal Slim, the great British commander, and the role that he played in listening to Chinese leaders who alone at that point had victories over the Japanese. And Slim stood out as that rare sort of allied commander who was willing to listen to the Japanese and take their lesson seriously. And he as they say, he managed to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. So it was a good conversation. It's a great book, and happy to have been able to talk to him.
Mark Melton, looking to next week as we approach Christmas, we'll be reposting our very much look forward to Yule Blog with Walter Russell Mead.
Yes, and actually I did a podcast, recorded one with him yesterday, I think it was yesterday. And so today I've been producing that, and that will go up on Monday. So that way you kind of get a little preview. It's the first time we've done a podcast with Walter. And he always updates the blog posts or the Yule blog. And I'm interested to see like what he does there. But it's always, good to remember that Christmas doesn't end on December 25th, but it begins. I think some people, when they hear the 12 days of Christmas, I think they think that the 12th day is December 25th, but it continues until January 5th or 6th, depending on which calendar you're looking at, if you include Epiphany or not. And so I know a lot of the Anglicans have, that's where I learned that Epiphany exists, and you get to keep the Christmas tree up for a little bit longer. So be on the lookout for that. And it's a good tradition to have.
Hey, I have to say though, people could be wrong about that, but they're not as wrong as I was. Growing up, I thought the 12 days of Christmas was Hanukkah, right? So I was not the intellectual giant then that I am now.
Well, thankfully you have Wikipedia where you can just look it up pretty quickly. Back then you probably had to go to the library, right?
So much confusion among you non-liturgical Christians.
Oh, it's terrible.
Well, Mark Levecki, in the 90 seconds we have remaining, any profound spiritual observations on the political Christian realist implications of Christmas?
The shadow of the manger is a cross. We have to remember that Christmas exists because Easter, Good Friday must. It is the heart of Christian realism. It is a full accounting of the dignity and depravity of humanity.
On that note,
I was going to say I have a piece from Christianity in Crisis in 1945 about Christmas that will have a Christian realist that's scheduled for early next week. So be sure on the lookout for that.
Perfect and superb. Gentlemen, Merry Christmas to you, and Merry Christmas to all listeners of and fans of Marksism. Until next time, bye-bye.
God bless us, everyone.